Clang. The antique clock, my husband's last keepsake, hit the hardwood floor and shattered, the pieces scattering with a sound like a strangled scream from the past. I dropped to my knees, glass biting into my skin as I tried to gather each fragment with trembling fingers. Behind me, Lucas let out a low, cutting laugh, a sound dry, sharp, and cruel, like metal scraping metal. "Look at you," he sneered, "crawling on the floor like some pathetic old woman." I didn't even have a chance to breathe before slap. The crack of it ripped through the kitchen. His hand struck my cheek so fast my ears rang, my heartbeat pounding like a frantic drum in an emergency room. "Your job is to take care of me. Clean up this mess. And don't make me say it twice." Then the door slammed, hard enough to rattle the frame, leaving me frozen on the cold floor, my hands still wrapped around the broken pieces of our history. What I didn't know then was this tonight would be the last night Lucas ever walked freely inside this house. So what happened the moment that door closed behind him? My name is Joanne Evans. I sat in Jim's old recliner, watching the February blizzard attack my Chicago brownstone while the radiators hummed their steady warmth inside. The living room glowed with 43 years of marriage captured in silver frames. Jim, in his firefighter uniform, teaching Clark football, dancing with me at Emily's wedding. At 66, I'd spent 4 decades as a head nurse, managing chaos and reading vital signs before trouble announced itself. Tonight, my pulse hammered as I waited for the sound I'd been dreading, the scrape of a key in my front door. Clark had been gone for 3 days of blessed quiet, but I knew he'd return, drawn back by need and rage like a wounded animal circling home. The front door slammed open with enough force to rattle the picture frames. "Mom!" His voice cut through the house, sharp with desperation and something darker. "I know you're awake." I closed my eyes and felt my nursing instincts kick in, assess the situation. Stay calm. Protect yourself. But those instincts warred with 36 years of motherhood. The part of me that still saw the sweet boy who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. Clark appeared in the doorway, snow melting off his bear's jacket onto my hardwood floors. At 36, he still carried traces of the college football player he'd once been. But addiction had carved hollows under his cheekbones and turned his eyes into something wild and hungry. He reeked of cigarettes and desperation. "I need $500, he announced, not bothering with hello. "The credit card. Now. Clark. It's 2 in the morning. You're tracking snow, don't." He held up his hand like a traffic cop. "Don't start with your housekeeping lectures. I'm not in the mood for your passive-aggressive bullshit tonight." I stood slowly, my knees protesting. "Honey, you know I can't." "Can't? What?" His voice cracked like a whip. "Can't help your own son? Can't spare a few $100s when you're sitting here living like a queen?" He gestured wildly around the room, taking in the warm lamplight, the comfortable furniture, the photographs that bore witness to happier times. "You pressured me into football until my knees gave out, then abandoned me the second I couldn't perform anymore. You never supported my dreams, only your own version of what I should be. And now look at me." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "I'm suffering out there while you collect Dad's pension and live in this palace. You owe me this money. Mom, it's the least you can do after ruining my life." The accusations hit like physical blows. I'd spent years in therapy learning that his addiction wasn't my fault. But in moments like this, his words found every crack in my armor. "Clark, I can't give you money for what? Say it. For drugs." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You think you know everything because you were some hotshot nurse. Well, guess what? You failed at the one job that mattered, being my mother." You were supposed to take care of me. And instead, you turned me into this." My hands shook as I reached for my purse, not to give him money, but to move it away from him. The gesture enraged him. "Don't you dare hide that from me." In one swift motion, he swept his arm across the mantelpiece. My grandmother's antique clock, the one that had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and Jim's death shattered against the hardwood in an explosion of brass and glass. I dropped to my knees instinctively, reaching for the broken pieces. That clock had chimed through every major moment of my life. Through Clark's first steps, through Emily's piano recitals, through the midnight call that told me Jim wouldn't be coming home. "Look at yourself," Clark sneered from above me. "Crawling around on the floor like the pathetic old woman you are." As I knelt among the wreckage, his hand closed around my upper arm with crushing force. He yanked me upward and backward, sending me stumbling into the stone fireplace surround. The corner caught my temple with a sharp crack that sent stars dancing across my vision. I slumped against the cold stone, tasting blood where my teeth had cut my lip. Clark loomed over me, his face twisted with a rage that made him unrecognizable. "Stop looking at me like I'm the problem," he hissed. "I'm your son. Your job is to take care of me, not judge me. So do your job." The slap came fast and hard across my cheek, the sound echoing off the walls like a gunshot. Before I could even register the sting, he was rifling through my purse, grabbing the emergency cash I kept for groceries. "This isn't enough," he muttered, stuffing the bills into his pocket. "But it'll have to do for now." He stepped over me like I was debris and headed for the stairs. "Clean up this mess," he called over his shoulder. "And next time, don't make me ask twice." His footsteps thundered up to his childhood bedroom, and I heard the door slam with finality. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault on the windows, but inside, a different kind of storm had passed through, leaving devastation in its wake. I sat bleeding on my living room floor, surrounded by the pieces of my grandmother's clock, and felt something inside me break as completely as the antique brass mechanism scattered at my feet. The tears didn't come. They should have. After 36 years of motherhood shattered in a single moment. But my eyes remained dry as I sat on the cold hardwood. Instead, something else took hold. The clinical detachment that had carried me through countless emergency room shifts. The steady calm that descended when someone's life hung in the balance. I touched the tender spot above my temple, where my head had struck the stone. A goose egg was already forming, the skin hot and tight. My lip throbbed where my teeth had cut through flesh. I catalogued each injury with professional precision: minor head trauma, split lip, bruising to the upper arm where his fingers had dug in like talons. The boy who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on ants was gone. The teenager who'd apologized for hours after breaking a dinner plate had vanished. The man upstairs, that stranger wearing my son's face, was dangerous. And I'd been pretending otherwise for far too long. I pulled myself upright, my 66-year-old bones protesting, and walked to the bathroom with steady steps. The woman in the mirror looked older than her years. Silver hair, disheveled. Blood dried at the corner of her mouth. But her hands were rock steady as she reached for the first aid supplies I kept organized in the medicine cabinet, a habit from 4 decades of nursing that had served me well in my marriage to a firefighter. Hydrogen peroxide, cotton swabs, antibiotic ointment. My movements were efficient, automatic. I cleaned the cut on my lip with the same methodical care I'd once used to prep surgical sites. No trembling fingers. No hesitation. Just the practiced competence of someone who'd seen worse wounds and knew exactly how to treat them. The antiseptic stung, but I welcomed the sharp clarity it brought. Pain was honest. Pain was real. Pain didn't lie to you about what was happening. didn't make excuses or promise things would be different next time. I leaned closer to the mirror, examining the darkening bruise that bloomed across my cheekbone like a storm cloud. In 43 years of marriage to a man who faced burning buildings for a living, Jim had never once raised his hand to me. He died protecting strangers. And now his son, our son, was the one I needed protection from. The realization settled over me like a shroud. Every time I'd covered for Clark, every lie I'd told Emily about why I couldn't visit, every dollar I'd handed over to help him get back on his feet, I'd been enabling my own destruction. I'd been carefully, methodically, lovingly digging my own grave. Tonight was the last time. I whispered to my reflection. The words hung in the air like a verdict. I walked back to the living room, where brass springs and shattered glass caught the lamplight like scattered stars. My instinct was to clean up the mess, to restore order as I'd done 1,000 times before. My hand actually reached for the dustpan before I stopped myself. Evidence. This was evidence. I stepped carefully around the debris and retrieved my spare reading glasses from the kitchen drawer. The house felt different now, not like a sanctuary violated, but like a crime scene waiting to be processed. At 4 in the morning, I sat at my kitchen table and let the nurse in me take complete control. I needed a plan, not the desperate, reactive scrambling of a frightened mother, but the systematic approach of a medical professional handling a crisis. I pulled out a notepad and began to write. My handwriting as precise as it had been on countless patient charts. Outside, the blizzard was beginning to weaken, but I barely noticed. I was deep in planning mode, considering angles and contingencies with the same focus I'd once applied to managing a cardiac emergency. Who would I need? What would I say? How could I ensure that this ended not with more violence, but with the help Clark desperately needed? By the time I finished my notes, dawn was still hours away, but I knew exactly what I had to do. I stood and opened the refrigerator, surveying its contents with new purpose. Buttermilk, eggs, thick-cut bacon, real maple syrup. Everything I needed for the breakfast Clark had loved as a child: fluffy pancakes with crispy edges, scrambled eggs with sharp cheddar melted through, bacon cooked until it shattered between your teeth. I'd made this meal countless times over the years, for birthday mornings, before big games, whenever he'd had a nightmare and crawled into our bed. It was comfort food in its purest form, the edible embodiment of maternal love and security. Today, it would be bait. I pulled out my largest mixing bowl and began measuring flour with scientific precision. The familiar motions calmed my hands and cleared my mind. I wasn't cooking out of fear or habit or the desperate hope that food might fix what was broken between us. I was preparing ammunition. The bacon began to sizzle in the cast iron skillet, filling the kitchen with the rich, smoky aroma that could wake Clark from the deepest sleep. I flipped each strip with practiced timing, achieving that perfect balance of crispy fat and tender meat that he'd never been able to resist. Upstairs, I could hear him moving around, probably wondering what had possessed his doormat mother to start cooking at 4:30 in the morning. Let him wonder. Let the smell draw him down here, confident in his victory, expecting my submission. He had no idea he was being summoned to his own judgment. The pancake batter was smooth and golden when I heard his bedroom door creak open. My heart should have raced, but instead, I felt only the steady calm of someone who'd finally stopped running from the inevitable. I added an extra pat of butter to the griddle and began pouring perfect circles of batter. Each one would be golden brown, fluffy in the middle, crispy at the edges, exactly the way he'd loved them since he was 7 years old. The last breakfast I would ever make for the boy who no longer existed. At 5 in the morning, with the pancakes keeping warm in the oven and the bacon draining on paper towels. I picked up my phone and dialed the first number from memory. Miller Residence. Matthew's voice was gravelly with sleep, but alert 40 years as a firefighter had trained him to wake instantly when the phone rang in the dark hours. Matthew. It's Joanne Evans. A pause. Joanne. What's wrong? Is it Clark? I touched the tender bruise on my cheek, feeling the heat radiating from damaged skin. He hit me. Matthew. Last night. It's time. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the distant rumble of snowplows working the streets outside. When Matthew finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of understanding, not surprise, but the grim recognition of something he'd seen coming for years. I'll be there in an hour. Don't let him leave the house. He's asleep. The storm will keep him here. I paused, steadying myself. Matthew. Bring your dress uniform. This needs to be official. The second call required me to scroll through my contacts. Officer Maria Rodriguez had given me her personal number 3 years ago, the night her mother died in hospice care. I'd held Mrs. Rodriguez's hand through her final hours, and Maria had pressed her card into my palm with tears in her eyes, promising that if I ever needed anything at all, I should call her directly. Rodriguez. Her voice was crisp despite the early hour. Maria. This is Joanne Evans, Mrs. Rodriguez's nurse. Mrs. Evans. Is everything okay? I need a civil standby for a domestic violence arrest. My son. Can you come to my house this morning? Around 8. I don't want a dramatic raid with sirens. Just quiet authority. Another pause. Shorter this time. Are you safe right now? Yes. He's asleep. But when he wakes up, I want witnesses here. People who can't be manipulated or charmed. I'll bring backup. We'll be discreet. But we'll be ready. Send me your address. The third call was the hardest. I pulled out my iPad and set it up on the dining table, angling it so the camera would capture the whole room. Then I dialed Emily's number in New York, knowing I'd be waking her at 6 in the morning. Mom Emily's face appeared on the screen, hair rumpled from sleep, eyes already worried. What's wrong? Why are you calling so early? I adjusted the tablet so she could see my face clearly in the morning light. I watched her expression change as she took in the cut lip, the darkening bruise, the careful way I held my head. Oh my God. Mom. What happened? Your brother came home last night. We had a disagreement about money. He hit you. It wasn't a question. Emily's voice went flat and hard, the prosecutor in her taking over. How bad? Bad enough. Emily. I need you to stay on this call. I need you to witness what happens next. I'm getting dressed. I'll catch the next flight. No. My voice was firm. I need you here. But I need you safe. Watch. Listen. Be my witness. Emily stared at me through the screen, and I saw her understand. This wasn't a crisis call for rescue. This was testimony. Okay. She whispered. I'm here. I carried the tablet to the kitchen and propped it against the wall where Emily could watch me work. With methodical precision, I set the dining room table with my best china, the cream-colored Wedgwood, with the delicate blue flowers that Jim and I had received for our wedding. I arranged the food on serving platters, the golden pancakes stacked high, the scrambled eggs fluffy with melted cheddar, the bacon arranged in perfect strips. The table looked like Sunday dinner at its finest, formal and welcoming. A table set for judgment. I retreated to my bedroom to dress, choosing my clothes like armor. The navy blue dress I'd worn to Jim's funeral, conservative and dignified. Underneath, I strapped on the back brace I'd needed since arthritis settled into my spine today. It would support me through more than just physical pain. I brushed my silver hair into a neat twist and applied my makeup with deliberate care. The foundation went everywhere except over the bruise. I left that purple-black evidence exposed, a stark contrast against my pale skin. I applied bright red lipstick with steady hands, drawing attention to my mouth, to the small cut that split my lower lip where my teeth had broken the skin. I looked in the mirror one final time, dignified, professional, and unmistakably injured. At 7:45, the doorbell chimed softly. Through the peephole, I saw Matthew Miller standing on my front porch, snow dusting the shoulders of his dress uniform. The brass buttons gleamed against the dark fabric, and the Chicago Fire Department insignia caught the pale morning light. He looked like what he was, authority incarnate, a man who'd spent his life serving and protecting others. I opened the door and watched his weathered face crumple as he saw mine. For just a moment, tears filled his gray eyes before being replaced by something colder and infinitely more dangerous. Jesus. Joanne. His voice was barely a whisper. Come in. Matthew. Quietly. He's still sleeping. 5 minutes later, Officer Maria Rodriguez arrived with 2 other officers. Their patrol car parked discreetly down the block. They moved like shadows through my front door, shaking snow from their uniforms and speaking in low voices. Maria was younger than I'd expected when I first met her at the hospital, maybe 35. With intelligent dark eyes and the careful bearing of someone who'd learned to read danger in domestic situations. She took one look at my face and nodded grimly. Where do you want us? I positioned them, like pieces on a chessboard. Matthew took his place at the head of the dining table, Jim's chair. The seat of patriarchal authority in our family hierarchy. The officers melted into the shadows of the hallway, visible but not threatening. Professional observers ready to act. Emily's face watched from the iPad screen, her expression a mixture of heartbreak and fierce determination. My daughter, the prosecutor, bearing witness from 300 miles away. The stage was set. The tribunal was assembled. Now all I had to do was wait for the defendant to wake up and smell the bacon. I smoothed my navy dress and touched the bruise on my cheek one more time. Upstairs, I could hear Clark beginning to stir, drawn by the aroma of comfort food and the promise of his mother's continued submission. He had no idea that breakfast was about to become a trial. At 8:30, I heard Clark's feet hit the floor upstairs, followed by the sound of his bedroom door creaking open. The rich aroma of maple syrup and bacon had done its work, drawing him from sleep like a siren call. I stood perfectly still in my dining room, hands folded in front of my navy dress, watching the ceiling as his footsteps moved across the hallway above. Matthew sat statue still in Jim's chair, his dress uniform lending him an air of solemn authority. The officers remained in the shadows of the hallway, silent as sentinels. Emily's face filled the iPad screen, her eyes fierce with protective anger and prosecutorial focus. We were all holding our breath, waiting for the defendant to enter his own courtroom. Clark's footsteps on the stairs were leisurely, almost triumphant. I could picture his face, the self-satisfied smirk that had replaced his boyhood smile somewhere along the path to addiction. He wasn't coming down to breakfast. He was coming down to collect his victory. He stepped over the broken clock shards without even glancing down, as if the evidence of his violence was beneath his notice. In his twisted logic, the elaborate breakfast waiting for him was proof of my capitulation. The old woman had learned her lesson. The mother had finally accepted her place in the hierarchy he'd created through intimidation and force. He appeared in the dining room doorway and surveyed the scene like a king inspecting his domain. The Wedgwood china gleamed in the morning light. The crystal glasses caught and scattered rainbows across the white tablecloth. The food was arranged with restaurant precision, golden pancakes still steaming, eggs perfectly scrambled, bacon crispy and glistening, Clark pulled out his chair with theatrical ceremony and settled into it with a satisfied grunt. He looked at me standing there with my bruised face and cut lip. And something ugly flickered in his eyes. Not shame or remorse, but vindication. He reached for a piece of bacon and held it up like a scepter, pointing it at me with deliberate menace. Finally, he sneered, his voice thick with morning satisfaction. You learned to obey. That's when he saw Matthew. Clark's hand froze halfway to his mouth, the bacon strip trembling between his fingers. His eyes swept the table and landed on the man sitting in his father's chair. Fire Captain Matthew Miller, in full dress uniform, brass buttons gleaming, face set in granite disapproval. What Clark's voice cracked. His gaze darted toward the hallway where Officer Rodriguez and her colleagues stepped from the shadows into the light. Then he spotted the iPad. Emily's face filling the screen like an accusing angel. The bacon fell from his nerveless fingers. What is this? An ambush. Matthew leaned forward slightly, his weathered hands folded on the table. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost conversational, which somehow made his words more devastating than any shout could have been. Your father and I fought fires together for 23 years. I held you when you were born. I taught you to fish, to throw a curveball, to be a man. His gray eyes never left Clark's face. But you aren't the man your father was. You aren't even the boy I took fishing. You're a coward who beats women. Clark's mouth worked silently for a moment, before words tumbled out in a desperate rush. Uncle Matt. You don't understand. She's been, it wasn't like that. She fell. And stop. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward, her badge catching the light. Her voice was professional, clinical. Clark Evans. You're under investigation for domestic battery, destruction of property, and violation of a harassment order filed by 3 separate creditors for gambling debts exceeding $15,000. This is insane. Clark shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the hardwood. Mom, tell them to leave. This is our house. Tell them it was an accident. He turned to me with wild eyes. And for just a moment, I saw a flash of the little boy who used to run to me for comfort after nightmares. But that little boy was gone. And the man who'd replaced him was dangerous. Mom, please, he whispered, his voice breaking. I love you. You know I love you. I looked at this stranger, wearing my son's face. This man who'd shattered my grandmother's clock and split my lip, who'd stolen my grocery money and called it his due. I thought of all the years I'd covered for him, all the lies I'd told Emily, all the nights I'd lain awake, wondering if this would be the time he hurt someone besides himself. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of 66 years, the accumulated wisdom of 4 decades in nursing, the authority of a woman who'd raised 2 children and buried a hero husband. I love you enough to die for you. Clark, I said quietly. I proved that every time I gave you money I couldn't afford. Every time I lied to your sister about why I couldn't visit. Every time I cleaned up your messes and made excuses for your choices. My voice grew stronger with each word. But I love myself enough not to let you kill me. And I love you too much to let you become a murderer. The words hung in the air between us like a bridge I was finally brave enough to burn. You're not. Clark's face cycled through confusion, rage, and desperate calculation. You can't do this to me. I'm your son. You're a 36-year-old man who put his hands on his 66-year-old mother, I replied. And if I don't stop you now, next time, you might not stop at a slap. I looked at Officer Rodriguez and gave a single, decisive nod. The handcuffs clicked with metallic finality. The sound sharp and cold in the warm, food-scented dining room. Clark bucked against the restraints, his face contorting with rage and disbelief. "You're betraying me," he screamed as the officers guided him toward the door. "I'm your son. You're supposed to protect me. You're destroying our family." I followed them to the front door, my spine straight despite the pain radiating through my back. The morning air was bitter cold, and snow continued to fall in lazy flakes that caught in Clark's hair as they loaded him into the patrol car. He looked back at me through the window, and for just a moment, his expression shifted from rage to something that might have been understanding. Or maybe that was just wishful thinking from a mother who'd spent 36 years seeing the best in a child who'd grown into someone she no longer recognized. I didn't look away as the car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the gray Chicago morning. I stood in my doorway until the taillights vanished, watching my son disappear into the blizzard that had brought us to this moment. When I finally closed the door, the house felt different, not empty, but clean, like a fever had finally broken after a long and terrible illness. The last breakfast was over. The trial had ended, and for the first time in years, I could breathe freely in my own home. The silence that followed was profound, like the hush that settles over a hospital after a crisis has passed. Matthew lingered in the doorway, his dress uniform making him look formal and protective. In the morning light streaming through my windows, "I can stay. Joanne, help you clean up. Keep you company." I touched his arm gently. "Thank you, but I need to be alone with this." After he left, I walked back to the dining room where the elaborate breakfast still waited. Now cold and congealing, the Wedgwood china looked absurdly formal in the aftermath of such raw emotion. I picked up a piece of bacon, crispy and perfect, the way Clark had always loved it, and bit into it slowly. The tears came then. Finally, not the desperate sobs of a broken mother, but the steady, cleansing flow of someone who'd finally chosen herself. I cried for the little boy who used to help me make these same pancakes on Saturday mornings. I cried for the young man who'd had such promise before addiction stole his future. But mostly, I cried with relief that I was still alive to feel this pain. By afternoon, I was climbing the stairs to Clark's childhood bedroom. The space felt frozen in time, high school football trophies gathering dust on shelves, band posters still taped to the walls. I began folding his clothes with the same methodical care I'd once used to prepare surgical instruments. Each item went into boxes, labeled in my neat, nursing handwriting. I wasn't throwing him away, I was reclaiming my sanctuary. The boxes went to the garage, stacked neat and orderly against the far wall. Someday, if he earned it back, these remnants of his boyhood might find their way home again. But for now, they would wait in exile while I learned to breathe freely in my own house. 6 months later, Clark accepted a plea deal that sent him to mandatory 12-month inpatient rehabilitation instead of county jail. The prosecutor, a colleague of Emily's, understood that addiction was a disease, not just a choice. The day his lawyer called with the news, I felt something loosen in my chest that had been wound tight for years. I sold the brownstone that summer. Too many ghosts haunted those rooms Jim's absence. Clark's childhood laughter, the echo of breaking glass and harsh words. I found a bright corner condo near the Art Institute, with tall windows and clean lines that spoke of fresh starts rather than painful history. For the first time in decades, I decorated for myself alone, choosing colors that made me happy instead of ones that would hide the stains of family drama. I started taking watercolor classes on Tuesday mornings, joined a book club that met at the library, volunteered at the Children's Hospital where my nursing skills still mattered. I was learning to live for Joanne Evans, not just as Clark's mother or Jim's widow. 1 year after the arrest, I drove to a coffee shop in Lincoln Park for a meeting I'd been both dreading and anticipating. Clark was waiting at a corner table when I arrived, and the change in him was startling. He'd lost 30 pounds, revealing cheekbones I hadn't seen since high school. His eyes were clear, no longer carrying that wild hunger that had made him dangerous. He wore clean work clothes, a plumber's uniform, with his name embroidered over the pocket. He stood when he saw me and moved as if to embrace me. But I extended my hand instead. The handshake was firm, respectful, the greeting between equals, not between a servant and her master. "You look good, Mom." "So do you." I meant it. This man looked like my son again, not the stranger who'd terrified me in my own home. We sat across from each other with careful politeness. He ordered black coffee. I asked for tea. The conversation started tentatively, touching on safe subjects. His job, the weather, Emily's latest case in New York. Finally, he set down his cup and looked directly at me. "I hated you that morning," he said quietly. "When I saw Uncle Matt and the cops, when I realized what you'd done, I felt like you'd betrayed everything we were supposed to mean to each other." I nodded, waiting, but you stopped the plane from crashing. His voice grew stronger. I was headed for rock bottom so fast I couldn't even see it coming. Prison or rehab, an overdose or worse. You threw yourself between me and that wall, and it probably saved my life. The apology hung between us like a bridge. Neither of us was quite ready to cross completely. "I'm not the same mother I was before," I warned him. "I can't go back to enabling you. Even if you stay sober, that woman who gave you grocery money and made excuses for your behavior, she's gone." "Good," he said simply. She was killing us both. I drove home alone through the Chicago streets, past the fire station where Jim had worked for so many years. The American flag snapped in the autumn wind, and I pulled over for just a moment to watch it wave against the gray sky. I did good. "Jim," I whispered to the memory of my husband, to the ghost of the man who'd taught our son to be brave. "I saved him." The flag continued its eternal dance, and for the first time since Jim's funeral, I felt truly at peace. Sometimes the ultimate act of love is letting go. Sometimes saving someone means breaking your own heart first. But hearts, like bones, grow back stronger after they've been properly set. I put the car in drive and headed home to my bright condo, to my watercolor brushes and book club novels, to the life I'd finally learned to claim as my own. Behind me, the fire station stood as a monument to service and sacrifice. And ahead lay whatever came next. I was ready for it all. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on, it's knowing when to let go. Joanne's story reminds us that true strength isn't about enduring abuse or enabling destruction in the name of family loyalty. It's about having the courage to save someone by refusing to participate in their downfall. Picture a mother's hands, weathered by years of nursing others back to health, finally learning to heal herself first. When we love someone enough to say no, we give them the chance to find their way back to yes. Remember that boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges to healthier relationships. And if this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to remember their own strength. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and visit the Grandma Stories channel to discover more heartfelt tales of love, justice, and redemption, because here, every story begins and ends with love.